Hello and good afternoon. Yes, welcome. I see people are coming in, and we are so glad that you're here to join us today. We ask that as you come in, you say hello to everybody in the chat. And also, we love to see where are you coming from this morning. We usually have a very diverse group of people geographically coming from all over the globe. And we know from the registrants, we've got folks who are checking in from Canada, from throughout the US, absolutely, and also from the UK. Thank you so much for staying up and being with us. And we've also had some folks early in the morning, tomorrow morning, actually, it is for them, from Australia. So, yeah, everybody would like to know, where are you coming from this morning? And it's great to just come into a space and say good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, to just say hello to everybody as we are thinking about beginning our webinar. We have a new intro jingle for you, and we wanted to be able to share it with everyone. So yes, so that is our new beginning jingle. And feel free to comment on the jingle. We want to know, what do you think about it? Uh, what do you think? Of course, I'm looking at a blank screen. I'm wondering, why is that? There it is. Let's see if it'll play again. I don't know. But I think instead of the visual, we actually have the sound. So we're going to try to work on that. It keeps coming up in another thing. So we're going to move on and get going. I did want to peek a little bit while people are coming in. I want to see some of the comments of where people are coming from. I see, thank you, Amber. Yes, all the way from Holland. We appreciate that so much. Thank you for coming back so often. And we hope that we're helping you to decolonize your thinking, exactly, particularly as it relates to working with Black families, individuals, communities, and so on. I see Texas, California, Illinois, Maryland, Michigan, Kentucky. Thank you so much. Dayton, Ohio. We really appreciate it. We will be in Indianapolis in February. So I see a few folks from there. And thank you, Yasmin, for coming back from all the way from Canada. Absolutely. Thank you. And you're gonna have to help me out. Is that Najina? Where is that? From Pittsburgh? Is that right? That's Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania? Absolutely. I was just there, actually. I came back on Sunday. I was there for a conference. So yeah. Did I see Guinea? Oh my goodness. Thank you. Liverpool in the house. Love it. Love it, love it, love it. It's so nice to see all of you coming into the room. We appreciate that. We have a record number of folks who registered, so please settle in as folks come in. I'll continue to remind everyone to come in and greet everyone as they come in. We have a great panel today, and we're going to start with the introduction. So you have time to settle in. You need to grab something to drink, some water, another cup of coffee, whatever you have time to do that. We are going to remind you, many of you have been with us before, so you know that we're going to reintroduce ourselves very quickly. If you want to read through the bios and so on, please go on our website. But by now, you probably have seen that, crestprogram.com, and you can read through at your leisure, read through our bios. But let's see if we can get started. I'm going to turn it over to Dr. West.
Okay, so again, greetings from here in Atlanta. It's where I'm located. I want to welcome everyone again. It's exciting to see so many people from all over the United States and then our international participants as well. Most of you have probably been introduced to us before. Of course, you've already heard from Dr. West Olatunji, who is the CEO of CREST Program and a co-founder of CREST Achieve, along with myself. Again, you can you can review our bios on our website, crestprogram.com. We're going to move on to our longstanding staff members. Ms. Janae Bond is formerly our social media intern, is now a graphic designer, and Dr. Ashley Petian, who is our research fellow, formerly worked with us as a graduate assistant and has obtained her doctorate and moved on to bigger and better things, both in terms of her work, her life, her career, and in terms of her role here with CREST Program. Our newest member to the team, to the CREST Program team, is Ming Tate, which we've announced this before, but we just wanted to remind those people who may have attended our previous training event or people who are brand new to us. Ming is a student at Xavier University. She's majoring in psychology with minors in history and African American diaspora studies. And she's a great addition. She's already been super busy. If you are subscribed to our YouTube channel or to any of our social media profiles, then you've been seeing lots of posts from CREST Program that have been generated by Ming, and she's been a great addition, has made a big difference already to the work that we do here. So we welcome her. But we're going to move on to our guest panelists today. And so we're going to start with an introduction to Dr. Kent Butler. And for those of you who have participated in our previous events, you will probably recognize Dr. Butler for probably a wide variety of reasons, but definitely in terms of his prior work with us. He served on a panel previously talking about mental health issues. So just as a quick introduction or reintroduction to Dr. Butler for all of you, Dr. Butler is a professor at the University of Central Florida. He has served as a president of the American Counseling Association, or ACA. He's also been a past president of the Association for Multicultural Counseling and Development, which is also AMCD. Dr. Butler is a national certified counselor and a national certified school counselor. He is an ACA fellow and is a member of the AMCD Multicultural and Social Justice Counseling Competencies Committee and the founder and co-chairperson of the AMCD Writers Consortium. So we welcome Dr. Butler back, and we're excited about the information that he'll share based upon his wide variety of experiences in the field. Okay. Our second panelist is Dr. Joseph Jones, and I'm going to be introducing you to him. He is a first-timer with us. It's the first time that Dr. Jones has been a part of any of our webinars or training programs. He might be new to many of you, so I'm going to just give you a quick summary of his background. It's a lot of information here, so I'll just hit the highlights. Dr. Jones serves as a principal of the John F. Kennedy High School in New Orleans, Louisiana. He holds a doctorate in education from Xavier University of New Orleans, of Louisiana, and a master's of education, and also has an MBA. He received his bachelor's of art in political science from Xavier University of Louisiana, and previously, there you go, shout out to Xavier. Previously, Dr. Jones served as the assistant principal at Frederick Douglass High School. And he has done a lot of work related to being an advocate as it relates to unions. So he's worked with a number of different groups pushing forward their efforts to unionize and to achieve goals related to that purpose. Let's see. Dr. Jones brings a wealth of knowledge in the areas of education and advocacy and is very passionate about engaging underserved communities and people. Our third panelist is Dr. Michael Brooks. And Dr. Brooks is a counselor education faculty member and a program coordinator for the North Carolina A&T State University in Greensboro, North Carolina. His research centers on Black male success factors, counselor education pedagogy, ex-offender recidivism, and vocational rehabilitation. Dr. Brooks leads the PhD program in rehabilitation counseling and rehabilitation counselor education, which is the only PhD KCREP accredited program at an HBCU. Dr. Brooks received his BA in psychology from Morehouse College here in Atlanta, and his master's and doctorate degrees in counselor education and supervision from the University of Central Florida. Dr. Brooks has been a faculty member for almost 20 years, and before working at A&T, he worked in the counselor education program at the University of Alabama at Birmingham, UAB, and at the University of Florida in Gainesville, Florida. Dr. Brooks has a limited private practice to provide mental health counseling to individuals and offers supervision towards licensure for recent graduates of counseling programs. So again, we welcome our three panelists, and we're really excited about having all three of you here and to what you will share with our participants. And also getting you oriented to the CREST program family of participants. They're super active typically, and so looking forward to a very lively set of interactions amongst the panelists and with the panelists and the CREST program team, as well as all of our participants out there nationally and internationally. Okay, so we're gonna, as we always do, we generally use this as an opportunity to share with you some updates and reminders about the CREST program. So what we want to do is remind you that the CREST program has a number of credentialing programs, and the credentialing program that we want to talk to you about today is CREST Liberate. CREST Liberate is available, and I think in the chat we're going to share with you the link in Thinkific so you can find out more about that program. It's an emancipatory research training program for people who are engaged in research at whatever level. So if you're a participant in research and you're looking to decolonize your research approaches and strategies, CREST Liberate is an 8-unit training program that is available through CREST program, and you can access it through our program site on Thinkific. You can also go to our website and you can get more information about that program, about how it was developed, the learning objectives, the components of that training program, etc. So we invite you to take a look and see if it will address any of your training needs. We also want to remind you that we are still recruiting, although we have hired Ming Tate as our social media intern. We also have openings for graduate research assistants. As I indicated previously, Dr. Petian has been elevated in terms of her position. She's now a research fellow, so we're looking to replace that position. So we want to hire someone to serve as our graduate research assistant, and we actually have more than one position available in that area. So if you're interested or you know anyone who you think would be appropriate and fantastic in that role, feel free to reach out to us via our website, and we will definitely consider all appropriate applicants. We also want to remind you, as Dr. Westo Latunji has already told you or reminded you, that CREST program, particularly CREST Liberate, and CREST Achieve rather, will be participating in the ESCA conference again. And this year is going to be in Indianapolis in February. I think it's February 1st through the 5th. CREST program, specifically CREST Achieve, will have an exhibit booth in the exhibit hall. And we also have a presentation that we'll be conducting as part of that process. And you can participate virtually if you're planning on attending, or in person. And we'll provide updates about that on our website. For those of you who are participating in this webinar and were introduced to us as part of ESCA 2022. We look forward to seeing you again. And if anyone will be joining for the first time, we look forward to getting a chance to meet you in person, perhaps at the ESCA conference. We also want to remind you that CREST program does have a newsletter entitled Uplift, and the fall version or edition of the newsletter is available now via our website. So you can check that out. For those of you who have subscribed to our newsletter, you will have already received a copy of that, of the recent edition of the newsletter. If you haven't already subscribed and you're interested, you can just go to our website and subscribe, and you'll receive updates. You'll get future editions of that newsletter. And then lastly, we want to remind you about the remaining 2 training events for 2022. Wow, this year has really shot by. So we really only have 2 training events left, and we'll share that information with you at the upcoming slides. Dr. West, over to you. Can move on to the next one. Okay. So this is just a reminder of the training events that we've had during this term. So for summer and fall 2022, we had a variety of training events beginning in July, and of course culminating in our training event next month. So if you take a look at these events and there's something that you're really interested in, our July event about putting the race into ACEs is actually our most popular event. I think we had over 370 people who registered for that event. And we want to thank all of you for that. And just to say that today is our second most popular event. We've had over 320 people who registered for today's event. And so if you see an event that has happened in the past and you're interested in that, you can access these events via our website and our YouTube channel. But as a reminder, the main training event that we have in December is a repeat. So Dr. Wessel, if you can advance the slides, I want to tell them a little bit about this premiere. So there's a premiere event later this month. It's going to be on November 29th at noon, the same time, noon Central Time in the US. And it is actually a video of the event that we held previously, so back in September, that was conducted primarily by Dr. Petian about, it was a previous event that we conducted about Black children. It was a panel of Black children talking about their experiences with race-based trauma. And Dr. Petian will be premiering this event on November 29th via YouTube. And so if you're interested in hearing the voices of Black children talking about their own unique experiences in dealing with race-based trauma, it was actually a really amazing panel of youth who talked very, honestly and in a very mature way about their own experiences. And so Dr. Petian will be spearheading that event, and you're welcome to attend. And moving on to our December event, this is Celebrating with a Purpose. It's about how to infuse African and African-American culture and history into your holiday celebrations, whatever holidays you may participate in the months of November and December. We did part 1 last year. As a reminder for those people who may not have attended or may not remember specifically, it's designed to be sort of a show and tell event in which participants can actually have more interaction with us and with one another, because it's set up as a meeting. And as such, it's limited to only, I believe, 90 or 93 or so participants. And so since we typically have somewhere between 200 and almost 400 people register for these events, if you're interested in participating in that event, you might want to go ahead and register so that you can ensure that you'll be able to do that. It's sort of a show and tell activity. And so we invite all of you, if you feel comfortable, you can bring an item to the event that shares the ways in which you have been or plan to infuse culture into your holiday celebrations, everything from music or food item or a book or a game or anything, holiday decorations or activities, whatever you may want to share. We invite you to do that. Again, since it is limited seating, we suggest that if you're interested, you should go ahead and register as soon as possible because those slots are filling up. And I think that's it. We will be sharing our spring 2023 training schedule in terms of at least save the date as we develop that training schedule. And we've been incorporating all of your input and feedback about what topics that you thought we should cover. And so we have a plan to have our monthly events beginning in 2023 that address and incorporate all of your input and feedback. So as we move on to the topic for the day, because we'll be talking about homicide and suicide and issues related to those topics, we want to have an advisory. So the first thing is, if anything, any content that we cover in this webinar or training event serves as a trigger for you and you're feeling uncomfortable in any way and feel as though you want to reach out to someone to talk about those issues, we want to give you some information. So on this slide, you're going to see that there's the telephone number for the National Suicide Prevention Hotline, which is 1-800-273-8255. There's also a link for international suicide hotlines. So if you click on this information, or we're actually going to include this in the chat as well, you can click on that information in the chat and you can access hotlines that are available on an international level. And here's some other ways that you can access crisis lines. So here's some more information specifically to a way to do it via text, a way to access a crisis hotline that is focused on LGBTQ issues, because we know that population is at increased risk for suicide and other related issues. And for veterans as well, there's a way to access a line specifically targeted for veterans via the National Suicide Prevention Hotline number. Okay. So I'm going to turn this over to Dr. West Olatunji, who will share some statistics about homicide and suicide in Black men and boys.
Thank you, Dr. West. What we'd like to do now is to just give you a very brief overview of the research behind what it is that we're going to talk about. But I know many of you are anxious to be able to hear our panelists speak. So we really are not going to spend a lot of time on these slides. We really want to get to the discussion. But just so if you did not have this information or wanted to know where to get more information, if this is where you're doing your work right now, or you're a parent and you're concerned about young men in your life or older men in your life, and you wanted some information so that you could talk about it in an intelligent way, one of the things we understand is that the rate of homicide amongst Black men and boys is 8 times higher than the rate for their white counterparts. Yeah, I said it, 8 times higher, right? And the average age is 31, with 7%, right, being minors. Now, a lot of these included the use of firearms, right? And then another statistic that you need to pay attention to, 77% were killed by someone they knew, right? So that's real important for us when we think about relationships and about how people are managing their relationships. And then also thinking about suicide, the rates of suicide among Black youth. We did a webinar on the rising suicide rates among Black youth. And for Black males, it's increasing by 60%. And so these are real issues. Now we have a poll for you. Yes. So what is the primary cause of suicide? I don't know what's going on with this computer. I really don't. What is the primary cause of suicide and homicide among Black men and boys? So I'm going to launch a poll and give you a chance. So we've got over 100 folks who are sitting here with us today. And so we're going to see if we can get a high percentage of you responding to this poll. What's the primary cause of suicide and homicide among Black men and boys? Police brutality, dysfunctional home life, systemic oppression, poor decision-making, none of the above, all of the above. Let's see what you guys have to say. If you're having difficulty with the poll, feel free to just type in your response in the chat. So yeah, is it police brutality? Looks like very few people thought that was it. Poor decision-making, very few people are thinking about that. Oh my goodness. Oh my God, whoa. We're at about 80% participation in the poll itself. That is fantastic. I am very glad to see that. And we've got one person providing information in the chat. Absolutely. Ooh, very interesting. I'm looking at these. 84% of you have responded. All right. So I'm going to stop right here and I am going to share the results. All right. So you should be able to see the results. Does everyone see that? Awesome. So I see almost 60% said all of the above. That's very interesting. So panelists, I want you guys to take a look at this because you may want to talk about it. And we had about a quarter of the people saying systemic oppression. And then home life getting about, dysfunctional home life getting about 10%. But most of the people thought all of the above: police brutality, dysfunctional home life, systemic oppression, poor decision making. Only one person said none of the above. So thank you so much for participating in that. We are going to keep going, and hopefully the panelists will want to talk to you about your responses. Dr. West?
Okay. So I'm going to quickly touch on some risk factors, which I'm sure our panelists will discuss in greater detail. So I'm going to sort of whiz through this so that we can move on to the panel discussion. But some of the risk factors related to homicide, suicide, and or violence include intersectionality, which looks at the number of socially marginalized groups that a person considers themselves to be a part of. So you might be looking at someone who's a member of a racial or ethnic minority, someone who is based upon gender, is socially marginalized in some way. Also in terms of sexual orientation, so individuals who are members of the LGBTQ community are being at increased risk, and then things like immigrant status, et cetera. So looking at the number of different identities that someone may have with respect to socially marginalized groups will increase their risk for homicide, suicide, and or violence. Everything from family-related factors to neighborhood-related factors. One of the things that was very consistent in terms of the risk for firearm homicide for Black men and boys had to do with the level of poverty in the community. And there was a dose-response relationship, being that the higher the level of poverty, for each level of poverty that we looked at, there was a stepwise increase in their risk for being the victim of homicide. Then, of course, there's systemic inequities with regard to education, economic, employment, housing, health insurance status, coverage status, et cetera. Of course, systemic oppression or systemic racism, as was indicated in the poll. A lot of people did select that as being the primary reason or one of multiple reasons. COVID-19, we've seen that these numbers have gone up significantly since from 2019 to 2020 and from 2020 to 2021. So these are just a wide variety of risk factors. These are things that put Black men and boys at increased risk for violence being directed at them, suicide or homicide. So we always have to talk about protective factors. because we always want to be looking at how to promote resilience. So if we move on to the next slide, that is going to allow us to talk about how do we harness the power of resiliency via loading up on these protective factors and Black men and boys. So the first thing is going to be something that's very systemic. It's about limiting firearm access, whether it's having stricter gun laws or securing the firearms that are available. There are things about the community. So if we know that there are issues related to the neighborhood, the physical environment in which Black men and boys live, that we have to talk about doing things like revitalizing things like vacant lots and empty housing units, et cetera. We want to bolster their support networks. There's been a lot of research that's looked at the protective nature of racial and cultural identity development. We want to be able to address some of these things, these inequities related to housing and employment, access to opportunities to start businesses or educational opportunities. And we also want to make sure that Black men and boys have access to programs that provide services that are needed, like crisis intervention, that address trauma, particularly race-related trauma, but other forms of trauma as well, that teach coping and problem-solving skills as well. And then lastly, within the juvenile justice and the adult criminal justice system, looking at restorative justice programs rather than programs that look to punish, but rather to restore communities, to make them whole, and individuals to make them whole.
Okay, so for culture-centered interventions, we're offering these 5 points, rite of passage programs. You've heard us talk about those in the past in terms of creating a sense of belonging, which is also a key factor, mediating factor. The use of culture-centered counseling theory and intervention. So for all of you mental health professionals out there, we must move forward in using culture-centered theory and interventions. And also, how do we work with parents so that parenting is more consistently culturally situated? About transforming our schools so that our children who are in these schools where they are 90-something% of the population, that the curriculum that's used for those students needs to be culturally situated. Also working in communities around historical trauma, historical resilience, emotional emancipation circles, and so on. And definitely, as we've constantly emphasized, that we know we have 30-something years of research around racial cultural identity development and its correlation to overall well-being, to high academic achievement, and so on. And so we know that any intervention that we do with Black men and boys needs to focus on their cultural identity, their group identity. All right, so I am going to stop sharing and I'm going to pin our speakers. And so we have some questions, and I'll get us started with some questions. And the first question is, what are the most important issues that are impacting suicidality among Black men and boys? And anyone can start, and you can just, as you feel moved.
So, well, thank you. First of all, thank you all at CRESS for having these types of forums for individuals to be able to learn. Before I get started, though, I would like to, I just want to speak to the violence that just occurred, that was happening at the University of Virginia. And I think that it speaks to, in a very loud way, the reason why we need to have these conversations. And suicidality and those who are doing things that harm our community through homicide, we need to speak to those, and because it's alarming that these types of things are occurring. And I think that a lot of it is because there isn't a space for us to actually really discuss and talk about how we are impacted by the things that happen in our lives. And so when we think about the question that you asked, it really is stemming from the lack of awareness, the lack of the ability to do anything other than something that's violent to try to resolve the things that are happening in people's lives, whether it be conflict, whether it be a feeling of hopelessness, a feeling of not being able to belong. These types of things, I believe, are the things that are setting the stage for individuals who think there's no other way out. And so they act on those particular desires. And so I think the case at the University of Virginia speaks so highly to what this looks like. So if a case study was to be put upon this, and I don't know all the details, I know that, there's things that are being put out there that talk about the person possibly being hazed or the person, something going along those lines. So when those details come out, those things are the things that we need to kind of focus on and get into our communities and talk about, so that we can perhaps kind of put a stopgap measure in place that stops individuals from going to the most extreme way of solving the things that are problematic in their lives, whether it's trauma, whether it's hopelessness, or any of those other things. And I'll stop and pull back and let the other panelists speak.
Thank you to Chris for giving us space to have these conversations. I'm going to respond to the poll too, while I have the opportunity. I think the answer was all the above. I think the causes for homicide and suicide among Black men and people is multifactorial and complex. I think even one of the responses being systemic oppression is complex in and of itself. I think the accessibility to violence and gun violence in particular permeates many different places, which is complex. Even the limiting of weapons and high capacity firearms and ammunition and the economics that go into those decisions are complex. The simple answer is just to vote, but even access to the polls and the new Jim Crow 2.0 or 3.0 are complex. So maybe it's simple for me to say all the above, but I think we are constantly living in a state of hypervigilance and awareness. We are under stress more than we ever been. We don't talk enough about stress. We don't talk enough about living with stress. So all the above seems to be the reason why someone can lose hope, downward spiral, and decide that it's easier out than in. To answer the question that you just asked, issues impacting suicidality among Black men and boys, I think there's still too much inability to recognize the signs and symptoms of suicide, as well as shame, guilt, and stigma around asking for help. I often sit on these pedestals or step stools about the toxic masculinity, or just be a man, or absorb yourself of feelings, or intergenerational trauma. That I don't have time to be weak, so suck it up phenomenon. And I think the totality of all of that thinking converges on young Black boys and even older Black boys and young Black men and older Black men, which makes it very easy to again decide not to be present and in their lives.
Thank you, guys. Thanks for the discussion. I'm Dr. Jones, and really am honored to be a part of this. As a school leader here in New Orleans, I think we have a multitude of factors that impact our young boys, and so can't speak about like the factors that I know of specifically with mentoring and having conversations and actually doing the work. And I think similar to what my peers said, Dr. Brooks, it's a multitude of factors, it's all of the above. I also know with teenagers, there is this sense of loneliness that oftentimes happens because they are not able to communicate in a way that we are about like what is happening and the stresses that they have. Um, it's interesting for young boys, you see a transition from like 14 and them being our boys until like 16, 17, where they're thought of instantly as like men. And they have this pressure to provide for their family and to work and to have money, and then while also dealing with a curriculum that is very biased, and then pressures from home, and then like peer pressure from their peers to do specific things, that all is like compounding. And I think ultimately leads to what we know is like suicidal thoughts, but not being able to address and understand what's happening, or to even understand that they're depressed, and then not having the avenue or the resources to communicate what's happening. And then there's so many times in my seat having conversation with different young men where you're like, you're not the only one going through this. Your peers are actually going through this as well, but them not feeling or having a space to communicate those thoughts with each other, which I think will probably oftentimes dismantle that sense of loneliness. And so there are like a bunch of factors that I know impacts young boys, but also still impacts them as they grow older and become men. I think in my role, I've been able to mentor boys and see them progress up until they're like 27, 28, and 30, and have had continued conversation about what that means in the development and the pressure that Black men have on them, that leads ultimately to like depression and other things that we talk about. So just really interested to dive into the conversation and to talk about those things in hopes of obviously trying to figure out better ways to support our Black men and our Black boys so that we can decrease those numbers.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So how does race-based stress reflect this phenomenon among Black men and boys? So, you know, we talk a lot about race-based stress. We talk a lot about continuous traumatic stress of dealing with the microaggressions, the slow drip, I call it, the slow drip of systemic racism. So what do you think that has to do with this phenomenon that's going on, whereas Black males are experiencing suicide and homicide at these astronomical rates?
Well, you know, I think one of the things that's really important in regards to what you just shared is our development as youngsters. We have to be in a situation where our caregivers are giving us the ability to grow up in our regular space, right? And not grow up too quickly. All of a sudden, we have these individuals who are trying to grow up to be men when they're 4, 5, 6 years old, because maybe the households that they're in, single parent or whatever have you, and so that pressure on top of the pressure of having to live life and not be able to be a child and not be able to understand how I am growing into this existence. And so when we don't have that as a part of our well-being or a part of who we are as individuals, those deficits show up in many different ways. And so I believe that they show up in exactly what you're talking about. You know, we're trying so hard to prove that we're this and we're that. And then as Dr. Brooks shared, you know, we have these individuals who are trying to be, you know, cool pose or masculine and all these other things, and don't even understand what that even means. And because of that, they act out. And then they have people in their life who are not mentoring them to be better. They're either showing up as ways of showing their deficits. They're not trying to strengthen them and give them the types of tools that they need to move forward. So I think all those things are impacting how these gentlemen then turn around and respond to those types of things. And CTSD is a very serious thing. I actually, as an adult, looked back at an incident that happened to me when I was in my 20s and realized just this year how it triggered me when George Floyd was murdered. And so if I'm at this age dealing with those types of situations, can you imagine somebody who is not equipped or ready for the types of trauma that's happening in their lives to be able to respond?
I think similarly, like from a school perspective, I think about race-based trauma in an instance of like the environment of a classroom. I'm not sure if people know, but Black male teachers only make up 1 to 2% of the teaching population. And so if I'm a young Black student and I don't see people that look like me, understand me, oftentimes that can cause biases in the environment that they're in that then creates that stress, right? And so if I'm not being uplifted within the classroom, or I don't see teachers that uplift me and I'm dealing with a curriculum or a test that is biased, right? I have those stresses and on me, which equates in, I think, what goes with the high school to prison pipeline. We know from students academically, if they do not feel comfortable within the classroom setting and they're stressed, they act out in different ways. Those acts then causes them to oftentimes be suspended and expelled. Black men and Black young boys are suspended and expelled at higher rates than their peers. That then causes them to leave school. They're on the street. There's so many factors that impacts, you know what I'm saying, that I think race-based stress and how it impacts our boys that ultimately leads to what we're talking about in the discussions that we're having. I think beyond that, there's not an avenue to discuss these things or to mediate our young men, especially when there's conflict within them. And then I think understanding like exactly what's happening and what they're going through within the class setting is legitimately one of the causes that I see every single day. And we fight on the school level to get more Black male teachers in the classroom so that our Black boys can also see that there is a rainbow of Black men and that is not a monument. And so that is just one from my perspective that I would say that I see how race-based stress actually impacts what we're talking about today.
I don't know who is the epitome of Black manliness today. I don't know if it's Jesus, Jim Brown, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Barack Obama, James Earl Jones. I know I'm dating myself. Can't probably should say like Lil Wayne or LeBron James. But in all of these personas, none of these men are asking for help, or they're not openly documented as one who will ask for help. So there's a lot of pressure to live up to these people. Some of them may be role models. And if one doesn't live up to these expectations, then they're seen as a failure. They're seen as something less than a man, less than manly. So there's really no permission to be authentic or to create your own space to be who you desire to be. I think that's how the phenomenon relates to, I think that's how race-based stress contributes to suicidology and homicide among Black men. And you can be in just a turn of a bad decision, self-inflicting with guilt and failure. So again, the answers tend to be relatively simple, but they are huge, and there's so many layers in unpacking just the way we see ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that one statistic that I mentioned, that the people that they're experiencing these physical, interpersonal relationships that are going bad are people close to them. A lot of times we think about, and actually I had this experience many years ago here in New Orleans, working in a community that was known to be violent, and so on. And I brought my students in, having them to apply what they're learning in the classroom and also to help to be a part of the solution. And we get in there, and one of the things that they learned is they're safe. A lot of the violence that's going on is amongst people who know each other. And a lot of times the community violence is, violence amongst friends, violence amongst family members that spills out into the streets. But it's starting in these small, intimate relationships with people who know each other. You know what I'm saying? And so the work that needs to be done is not about, oh, I'm scared to go, over here and so on. It is about going in and helping people to have healthy relationships. You know what I'm saying? It's like I just did a keynote in Pittsburgh where I was talking about the need for folks to have close, intimate, and long-lasting relationships. And that what we know from neuroscience is just that is equivalent in many cases to psychotropic medication. And for those of you who are not mental health professionals, psychotropic medication is all that depression medicine people are taking, all that anxiety medication that people are taking, the ADHD medication that people are taking. And so what neuroscience is saying is that we can rewire our brains based upon the interventions. We can do something, but relationships is everything. Having good relationships is everything. So I'd like to know, what can we do? All right, I'm asking the panelists. What can we do as educators, as parents, as community people, as mental health professionals? What can we do?
Well, it's not praying and hope that those things kind of surpass, right? I'm so sick of my thoughts and prayers are with you. And that's kind of how people want to kind of tackle some of these different things. But I think it's difficult dialogue. We talk about it within other communities to talk about those things that are systemic and that need to be decolonized and broken down. But we also have to have these difficult dialogues with our own selves, right? In our own communities. When we talk about stigma, we sometimes have caused the stigma, right? We have listened to these stories from the past. We have let them kind of follow us through each generation, and we are allowing ourselves to kind of drink the juice, right? That is not helpful to our communities. And so when we don't communicate, when we don't have all the players at the table, right? So we talk about players being to kind of combat anti-racism, but we need all the players in the Black community to kind of be at the table as well. And everybody's jockeying for a position. I got the cure. I got the cure. Well, we need the cure together, right? We can't just hope that this one person has the cure and then everybody kind of runs over there and gets it. We need to sit down and actually talk about what's really happening in our communities. We need to, if you want to be the man, if you say that you're the man, then man up and do the right thing by your community, right? It's not shooting people. It's not killing people. It's not killing yourself. It's actually doing the things that are necessary to kind of create the spaces that we can all kind of love. You said it. We need to be in relationship with one another. We need to understand who we all are. And when we start bullying people, start hurting people, all we're doing is asking them to act out. And, it's a shame because everybody doesn't have the mindset to believe that, what, if I act out, I feel for the young man who just killed 3 people and has 2 other people who are hurting because his life is relatively over, right? Who could have been in his life to communicate to him that decision, that bad decision, one of the 3 things that you had up there, right? That bad decision is now going to impact your life, and not just your life, but the people that you have now kind of brought into the sphere because you decided you wanted to shoot people. And so those are the things that we need to kind of continue to communicate about.
What is very interesting is when I think Dr. West, you brought up a really good point about our kids. These are small issues that then implode to bigger issues. I think oftentimes our young boys are raising themselves, and then social media or mass media is who they look to when it comes to like how to resolve specific issues. So I'm not blaming this by no means on like the music we're listening to, et cetera. But there is this thought that if I'm upset, I fight or I kill if it gets to a specific point. more often than not, and I've lost several, I can't count on my hand how many young men I've lost through violence from a situation that is legitimately bite-sized because they are still kids. So it stems from, I don't like your shoes, you didn't like my shoes. We were best friends, you stopped talking to me, in a small disagreement that, because in New Orleans we say this thing, I feel played, then it becomes a bigger situation because they do not know how to communicate their feelings, because hurt turns into anger really quickly. And there's like oftentimes there's mediations where boys are together crying about a situation because they're human and their feelings are hurt, as opposed to being able to express that my feelings are hurt. They're expressing themselves violently because that's the next step. And I think what we need is opportunities for our young men to figure out how to resolve, how to deal with emotions, and being okay to express those emotions. In one hand, we tell our boys and Black boys to like suck it up or you can't cry, which oftentimes stops them from really expressing themselves and what they're going through and what they're feeling because they're still kids. Anytime we talk to like a 16, 17, 18-year-old boy, we're telling them that they're a man, but in all actuality, they're dealing with hormones and emotions and feelings. I think we talked about the UVA shooting. I think they were all on a football team together. I'm pretty sure that episode probably stemmed from something that was small, but because they do not have the skills to, you know what I'm saying, resolve their conflict, these things erupt more often in our communities. And I think this thought, I think somebody touched upon this, is like, what is a man? And how do our Black boys understand that they can identify as a man and then be feminine or be masculine and communicate and cry? And there is no, like, you don't have to be this perfect embodiment of a human, which I think sometimes our boys have the pressure to be, which leads to those things. And so I think it's just, how do we make sure as a Black community, we start to have those discussions and start to give our boys the tools, or ourselves the tool, on how to handle conflict, because those bigger issues oftentimes stem from the smallest of issues that I've ever seen in my life.
Dr. Jones, you reminded me of a video clip that I saw a while back. It's a young father and his son going to get immunizations. And the boy is 3 years old, maybe 4, whatever age you are, you get the first set of immunizations. And the father stares this young boy down, kind of saying, "Don't you dare cry." And you can see the boy is really doing his best to please his dad. He wants to please his dad, so he's fighting back the tears. And so the thing that's really atrocious, if you will, is when you go into the comments and you see people attaboying the father, raise him up well. That's right, be a man. You can see the compounds that are created at a very young age, and then that has 15 million views and likes. So it's starting extremely early and being replicated. But I think you've all said the answer in your previous responses, and that's create a safe space for people to discuss issues. I will only add and say, be mindful about our labels, be mindful about what we say about people that could follow them. And I think rather than mentor people directly, I think we need to be better mentors with our own behavior. I think people need to see Black men expressing themselves appropriately and publicly and intentionally. I remember I have a cousin who I would think is a man's man, Army veteran, large man, actually went to Xavier as an undergrad. And he broke down and cried when he was giving our family history. And I thought I would tease him about crying. And he looked at me and said, some things are worth crying about. And I never forgot that. And I tell people that all the time when I get emotional. And we need to make that more of the rule and not the exception, that expressing emotion is just as manly as whatever these other stereotypical images are, but do it because it is honest and reflective, but also as a demonstration and an exemplar to kind of counter some of these negative or debilitating, I guess that's the better word, examples.
I think that's so important what you shared just now.
Expressing emotions is manly.
It
Ooh,
is because
That's powerful. Say that again, Dr. Brooks.
Expression emotions are just as manly as any of the other stereotypical behaviors that we may readily reach to.
I think it's a misnomer to think that you're sitting somewhere and you're seeing something sad happen, or you're seeing something unfortunate happen, and you can't react or you can't respond because it's not seen as being manly, and that's really unfortunate, right? As you were talking just now, I'm thinking you're sitting there watching a movie with someone and something very sad happens, and you just got to sit there like this and not respond to what you both are sitting there watching. And one person can cry because he's female and one can't because they're male. That is such a discouragement to watching the movie. Why would you even watch it?
But Ken, isn't that honesty though? I mean, isn't that just being honest? Like if you see sad things, you behave in a sad way. If you see upsetting things, you behave in an upsetting way. You see happy things, you behave in a happy way. Isn't that just consistent? Like
it's normalized. It should be normalized.
Yeah, I mean, aren't we doing like a real flip with our emotions? We say, look, you can only have one emotion, and that's anger. So when I see something sad, I get angry. I mean, anger could be along the continuum, but when I see something sad, like really sad, I don't know, Bambi, the opening scene of Bambi, I get angry. Man, they shouldn't have shot Bambi.
Wait, I think about Cooley High when, let's pour, for those who aren't here, right? And so that's the only way we can showcase that we are sad about the fact that somebody is gone, as opposed to actually really feeling the loss, the brunt of the loss that we had just now experienced in our life.
Absolutely. I just want to piggyback on that, having worked in the juvenile court system within the system for 8.5 years, and then adjacent to the system for even longer. I often think about, wow, a good cry could have prevented a whole bunch of stuff, right? So sometimes it could have prevented some substance abuse, right? It could have prevented the need for medication. I mean, it's like, okay, if we can deal with this emotion, it could have prevented all other kinds of issues, problems with relationships and all of this. It's like, okay, if something sad happens, yes, sure. So I love this idea of brothers keeping it 100 with their emotions, or emotions beyond anger.
Well, it's a cleansing. It's a cleansing, right? Because it comes out of nowhere. Like I remember, when my mother passed away, years later, I was doing something and something triggered something in me. And I just had to go to tears, right? I just had to be there in that moment. And I had to let it go. But it also allowed me to free some things that I was holding inside, because I was able to say, you know what, I love my mom. Can you imagine a young man not being able to say that they love their mom and have to be all this and that because of something that may have occurred in that person's mother's life?
Exactly. So they're saying it's all good. People say that sometimes, right? I remember having this young man who we ended up having to detain in the juvenile court. I'll never forget. He was about 8. I don't even know where he got this term from, but when we went to lock him up, he said, everything's copacetic. I'll never forget it, because we didn't laugh, we had this huge, probation officer who said,
but was it used appropriately? Did it come out appropriately?
Huh?
I said, did it come out appropriately? Did he say it in the right context?
I guess he's saying it's all good. Like we let it say it's all good. No, it's not all good to be detained. No, it's not all good to be locked up for 10 days. And now you're going to go to alternative school. It's not all right. It's not good. But we say it's all good. Everything's copacetic or whatever. It's like, no. This is a feeling like either you feel betrayed, you feel angry, you feel upset, you feel sad, all of those things. It's like, yeah, keeping it 100 is super important. The other thing is there's a role, of course, within our family. So that example that Dr. Brooks provided about the little boy getting a shot. I remember I was in Harlem one day and I saw this little boy, about 3 or 4. He had a helium balloon and he was so happy. He was just walking along, little brother. He's walking along and he and his mom are having a good time. And I guess he just messed up and he let the balloon go. And he watched that thing, go away. And he started bawling. And when he started bawling, his mother was like, "Oh, I better not cry." She went through this whole thing. You're supposed to be a big boy and this and this and that. And went into the whole thing about him being a sis, a so-called sissy, whatever. She went into this whole thing. And he looked at her and he looked at the balloon and he looked at everybody around him because he was embarrassed. And he sucked it up. I don't know what he did with those tears. I would say his face almost looked dry, like he sucked them back into his eyes. And then he kicked something. And his mother saw him kick it and she didn't say anything. She was like, in other words, that's better. That's a better response. I'm okay with that response. I'm not okay with you crying out here in public. And I thought to myself, we're going to do that all along. And then when you get into a relationship or you have children and someone's saying, "Tell me how you're feeling. What's going on? Talk to me." It's like, it's been suppressed so long. It's like, okay, I've been taught so many times to convert whatever I'm feeling into something that's acceptable. Then maybe I'm going to have difficulty finding the words or feeling comfortable or thinking that you're not my own mother and let me know that she didn't approve of that behavior. Clearly my woman or my friends or other people in the community are not going to approve of that behavior. And so it becomes, then all of a sudden later in life, people are saying, "Open up, talk to me, tell me what you're feeling." Not some kind of way, but what kind of way are you feeling? Other than angry. And I think that we do our young boys and our men a disservice because in order to fully function, be a fully functioning human, you have to be able to emote the full range of emotions. So the idea of keeping it 100 with your emotions and still being a man and being able to express that is super important to prevent lots of negative outcomes for our men and boys and for our communities and for society as a whole.
I'll
Yeah,
give you, I'm sorry.
no, go ahead.
No, I'll give you, sorry. It brought me back. I just had a conversation with a student. He's obviously 27 and was really disappointed. And you could tell he had something on his way. Really close kid, was close to him. He actually ended up not finishing school, graduated, was at UNO, dropped out his senior year. And so I think as a high school community, we were kind of disappointed in him because he was like a very smart young man. And then what we started to see him spiraling, we start to see him more oftentimes engaging in street activity or drug activity that we didn't agree upon. However, most recently, he hit me up and was like, "I want to have a conversation with you, want to talk to you." And we had a conversation. And that repressed those feelings of not being able to communicate, like as they get older at 22 and 23 and Black men mess up, who are they able to like talk to and say, "I need a hug," or "I messed up," and communicate with and share those emotions. And so as he and I were talking, one of the things came to me. I was like, "Oh my gosh, like you had a kid when you were 19 and you were a freshman in college. And in having a kid, you had this feeling of disappointment, even though you didn't communicate that. However, that did impact whether or not you were able to work and amount of money that you were getting. So then obviously you start to like have these jobs, you lost your job. So the only way that you can make money because you wanted to provide for your son was to sell drugs, right? And so he and I were talking and I'm like, oh my gosh, like you have a lot that's on your plate. You're not able to communicate that to anybody. And then my question was like, why didn't you tell somebody? And he was like, nobody asked. And so on top of that, you have this mounting pressure of people feeling disappointed in your actions, but all you're trying to do is be successful and provide. And so I guess I just brought that up is because in that moment, and this is exactly a conversation last night, is like legitimately spent time speaking into him about like, it's being fine. It's okay. We all make mistakes. These things are happening, but oftentimes those conversations are not happening. More often than not, we hear, even within ourselves, Black men is not good. Black men do this. This is what happened. And I think all of that becomes compounding and not really understanding the journey and how oftentimes as a Black man, there's a double consciousness that you have about the way you approach things and how can you communicate and I can't communicate that and the need to want to provide and not be able to express my feelings, or if I'm sad, if I'm lonely, it's especially as you get older. Like 16, 17, yes, like I might be more willing. But if I'm a 23-year-old man, a 24-year-old man, I oftentimes can't go to my best friend and cry on his shoulder. Or oftentimes I can't have a wife that I can cry on, or my mom, and tell her how I'm feeling, or how I feel depressed and how I feel disappointment, and also get somebody to speak into me and tell me that it's fine and I'm only human and I'm still young and I'm 24 and 25 and I'm going to make those mistakes. And that was a realization for me in our conversation. And you're absolutely right. As a Black male who seems to be educated, there's times that I've messed up when it comes to Black boys, and expecting the world of them and not realizing that they're only human and they're going to make mistakes, and allowing for those mistakes to be made and fostering an environment that is full of positivity. But I just brought that up because I think oftentimes we see men, and we see our young Black men engaging in things without realizing the stresses that they're under, which ultimately leads to like suicidal thoughts, or engage in activities that is going to create scenarios where they're going to get shot and going to get killed. But I think it all stems from the pressure that they're under and not being able to communicate what is actually happening, because we don't foster the ability for our men not just to cry, but to seek out help, but to be vulnerable, and also to be willing to mess up and understand that it's okay even if they're messing up, because we still, no matter what, there's still this enormous amount of pressure for Black men in some ways to be perfect. And that is hard to attain. That is hard to attain. And if they're not that, then there's layers of disappointment that continues to create. And so that's just my thought on it. But had that conversation with him yesterday, and most of our time was like just really uplifting him, so that he feels okay in his decisions and finding a way out of it. But if it weren't for that opportunity to have that conversation, I'm not sure where that student would be and what, you know what I'm saying, what that future would potentially look like.
You know, what you shared, thank you for sharing that. It triggered a thought in me just now in terms of, you know, I'm looking at this, and systemically, the problem is maybe it's not just, you know, helping Black males express, right? It's really looking at our whole community and how we actually deal with all of this in the first place. So our caregivers, who have now for generations imparted to Black men that they had to be a certain way in order to survive, right? We treat each other in ways that, you know, way back in the day, we thought was the proper way for us to survive, right? We had to be able to survive in survival mode, and we couldn't let people just be themselves. And so, you know, it takes us going into our communities and actually having some very deliberate conversations about what is it that you're learning? What did you know was the way that you had to raise your kid? Because there is no action plan or no playbook on how to raise a child. We just do it based on what we have learned from the people in our past, right, who are leading us on. And so we're kind of showcasing what we want us to do. So it's like we want to be these perfect people for the people who are in our lives, right? So when we go to church, we treat our kids a certain way because our kids have to act a certain way in church. When we go into the store, we have to do certain things. And so we have all these things that are set up that we are trying to navigate, but what we aren't doing is communicating about how it has actually impacted our community, right? So we now have this sense of Black males having to go out and do harmful things or to harm themselves because that's what it means to be a man. And when in all actuality, if we had sat down and communicated about what we need to do as a community, we might have been able to kind of circumvent this in a way that has really impacted a more powerful existence of us as a community, as opposed to us being seen as the statistic.
Absolutely. I'm glad that you brought that up, Dr. Butler, because I think that is a perfect segue from what Dr. Jones was saying to what you're saying. And what I was sort of thinking, this idea, I think that a lot of times in the Black community in particular, there's seemingly a long list of infractions that the appropriate response to those infractions is to become violent, right? So if somebody does this, if they do that, if they say this in front of somebody, they front on you, they disrespect you. It's like disrespect. When I was growing up, it was, oh, they could put their foot on your new shoes. Oh, you got to fight about that. It was like this long list, especially in the hood, when there's a whole lot of pressure. We're under so much pressure, and you know, low income communities or income communities where there's a whole lot of, I guess, systemic oppression and all sorts of other issues going on. It's almost like what happens is there's this pressure in the community, and it's pressure on children, and it becomes we already feel disrespected by American society in general, and it's like, I won't tolerate another instance of disrespect. So it becomes, if you look at my woman, if you talk to my woman, if you ask her to dance, if you do this, it's like, oh, this whole thing. If you don't apologize, if you actually bump it, if you don't say it fast enough, if you don't say my bad, it's just this whole long list. If you don't, and people look around and people see, you let that go. It ends up being, you have very little wiggle room to still be a Black man or Black boy, self-respecting, like, oh, this happened, and I have to have this particular response. And if I don't have that response, I'm going to lose my street credibility. People will have no respect for me, and now I'm going to fall in the social rung. So it becomes this thing of creating more wiggle room that you can still be a self-respected Black man or Black boy, and maybe let some things go. Maybe it ain't that deep, right? So
and only do it within your community, right? You do these things and you only do it within your community, and like you have a respect for other communities. It's like you go and you kill amongst yourselves, and you do this harm in your own community, and you don't even think about doing that outside of that community in terms of building and growing and things along those lines. You only treat your own people in that manner, and that's sad.
right.
I need to jump in because Dr. Petian was supposed to manage the Q&A, and some of the we have answered some of the questions that are there. So I hope that our participants are looking at the Q&A and see some of the responses that we've put in. And panelists, there can be more than one response, so feel free to jump in there. I've added to some of the things Dr. Butler put in, but Ashley, did you want to take just a few minutes to be able to maybe sum up some of the questions and the answers that have been provided? And if there are any outstanding questions in the chat, perhaps, that we need to respond to.
Yes, thank you so much. I'm Dr. Tunji. And thank you to all of our attendees for your amazing questions and engagement in the Q&A feature, but also the chat box as well. So one of the questions that stood out to me from the Q&A box was, I think her name is Anna Anicia, and she asked about, or she disclosed herself as a Black woman who practices as a licensed provider, and wanted to know some of the panelists' thoughts on how Black women can show up for Black men, both personally and professionally. And Dr. Butler shared a response in the chat, as well as Dr. Tunji, but I wanted to open that up to our other panelists, Dr. Brooks and Dr. Jones, to hear your perspectives on how we as Black women can, again, support and show up for Black men, both personally and professionally.
And this is not me jumping in the shallow end of the pool, but openly express how attractive it is for Black men to be emotionally expressive. We know the physical attributes, generally speaking. I think we've heard or we've spoken about the monetary superficial possessions or the edifying, but I don't know if I were to poll some of the students at my university, would I hear being emotionally sensitive or having a high emotional response attribute as a top 5, top 3 attractive characteristic.
Okay, what are some of the others? We're down to almost the last 10 minutes of our session. So Dr. Petian, could you just summarize some of the things that are out there? And then we'll go to the panelists for their final comments.
I'm sorry, I was eating. I just wanted to make one comment. I apologize.
Yeah.
I think one thing that Black women can do, our sisters, is I think in a way cultivating Black men being able to explore what it means to be a man. I think that is ultimately the key. And I know that that seems vague, but I think oftentimes like our boys who may not be interested in football or in things what we consider like what boys need to be a part of, I think they feel a lot of pressure in not being able to live up to that standard and just being able to cultivate them as they go through life and they transform. Because there's no, I think Dr. Brooks says this, there's no epitome of a man. And so there's also not an epitome of a boy. And really understanding that these are still kids. And while they might look broad and big, they cry, they hurt, they are the nerdiest of nerds. And oftentimes they seek out ways to explore themselves, but are not able to explore their interests and what they might believe in because of their thought of not being that. And so like thinking through the analogy we talked about with the boy getting hurt and saying like, you'll suck it up, is kind of like, how do we cultivate opportunities for our young men to express themselves and express their emotions is ultimately what I think is probably, and then having more conversations like this and having healthy dialogue with each other, Black men and Black women, to talk about how we support each other, because oftentimes we don't engage in healthy conversations about that. And I think ultimately what happens is we start to, me and my best friend, we say this all the time, we hate each other, or it seems like we hate each other all the time, because oftentimes our dialogues are not built in what we can do to support each other and understanding our shared experiences and our different experiences, as opposed to being upset about like what happened and what took place. So I think that is my best piece of advice, and would love to see that happen between both men, because Black women also, like, we have this conversation, but the rates are high also amongst Black women as well. And so like, and that's a reality. And I'm pretty sure you all have faced the same things in a nutshell that we do. And so just wanted to name that.
Thank you.
Mhm. All right, Dr. Petian, any final Q&A things that you'd like to bring up before I move it on to Dr. West with the resources?
Yes, I wanted to call attention to one question that we just recently got into the Q&A, and it was, because we've been talking about, kind of interpersonal, like individualized relationships, but this question was more about systemic and community-based supports and how we can help build and gain trust in communities to be able to do this work. So thank you, Shaquilla, for that question, and I wanted to bring that to the attention of our panelists as well. So how can we even like build and gain trust within our communities to begin doing this work as educators, clinicians, parents, community members, those sorts of things?
Awesome. I do want to remind people that we have a post-webinar survey. So we'd like to hear what you thought about today's webinar. So I think Dr. Petian is going to put that in the chat. It should pop up for you automatically from Zoom, but just in case, we want to make sure that you have it. We use that to be able to enhance our programming, as you heard Dr. West talk about at the very beginning of our session. I also wanted to encourage you again, since we're trying out the jingles and things like that, what you thought of that opening jingle that we have, and we're going to have a closing one as well. So we want to hear what you think about our music that we're adding to our beginning and to our end. So please, thank you so much for that. We have 6 minutes, and so Dr. West, I saw you put the resources in the chat. Was that to give more time to the panelists to give final words? All right. So panelists, could you have very briefly, could you just give us some closing remarks?
I think this is just a starter. I think the follow-up is where we get a certain level of depth. And if we could move to action and sustainable efforts, we can start to get into the crux of the matter. And also just remember to continue to support one another. It's lonely outside. It's hard work. You don't get the thanks that you properly deserve. But your impact may come in a delayed response. But thank you again for the time to share.
I appreciate the opportunity to speak. I think one of the things that we must recognize is that each of us comes at this individually, and our voices are important and they matter. And so while you have three panelists here who are speaking on behalf of this issue, there are so many other voices that are out there that we need to be tapping into and allowing them to help feed us so that we can do the right thing by the people who are in need. So we sit and we kind of throw these things out there as to what we can do as a community, but we actually really need to sit down and talk with even the hardcore of the hardcore, or all of those individuals, to talk about what the needs are so that we can then hopefully create and establish and develop the types of things that are necessary to help Black men to persevere and to succeed and to see themselves as worthy, and not to see themselves as someone who has to act out violently towards themselves or towards others.
Thank you. I'm just really honored to be a part of this discussion. I think, hey, I mean, the honest to God truth, 10 years ago, this dialogue and this conversation probably wouldn't have happened. And I'm thankful that we have progressed in a way where we can norm around, we have to allow our Black boys to have spaces and express themselves and really like digging into like what is actually happening. And I think there like 10 to 15 years ago, there wasn't much research about it. And we didn't have many conversations. And so I'm really excited about where we've evolved. I do want to, I'm excited about like pushing this bigger, because I think we need to involve, to Dr. Butler's point, more people, more key stakeholders in this conversation to not just talk about what needs to happen, but actually vote. I think Dr. Brooks said that earlier, to make big changes and systematic changes that does impact what's happening with our kids, and so that there are resources available for them, and that we're not just having a dialogue about this, but we're actually seeing and creating spaces that can provide resources and provide tools to decrease these numbers that we're seeing amongst homicide as well as suicide in our Black youth and Black adults as well.
Awesome. I would just want to remind folks that we provide you with evidence-based interventions. And so I say, just take a deep breath and just go ahead, create one of those programs, just jump right in. There's never going to be an ideal time. There's never going to be enough financial support. There's never going to be enough people who are going to say, yeah, go for it. Instead, there'll be a lot of naysayers. It ain't going to work. It's not going to happen. They won't do it. They won't come. They won't, it's all of that. Instead, just start doing it, right? Just start doing it. Start small, start where you can, start with the resources you have. Just get started. That is the thing that I would want to leave you with today, is just get started. When we did the webinar back in the spring, I think, on suicide rates, and I looked at the suicide rates for Black girls, and I said, when I get my next pot of money, I'm going to do something for Black girls. I'm just going to do it. So we're starting a girls' rite of passage program, and it's going to start in January. So it's like, and it's with the money we have, it's like, it's not what we want. It's not what we need. It's just what I got. And we're just going to do it. We're just going to do it, right? And hopefully we can get more money. But that is what I would say to you. Don't wait. A lot of you are asking, what can I do? What can I do? We've shown you the evidence from the research where they're saying these are the things that work. So just do it. Just do it and tell us about it, right? Reach out to us, right? And just do it. We've got a lot of folks who are on here who are experts themselves So just get started. We're gonna start doing this thing of when it's 90 minutes, we're gonna start our closeout music. To let you know, thank you so much for being with us. We appreciate you. We hope to see you next month. If not, we'll see you in the new year. Please, please spread the word, let people know, subscribe to our newsletter, subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on social media. Yeah, we just do it, just do it. Thank you to the panelists, Dr. Jones, Dr. Butler, Dr. Brooks. Yes, thank you so much. The A team, thank you, thank you, thank you for everything. Everybody, thank you so much for coming. We appreciate it. Don't forget to do the survey. Don't forget the survey. Thank you so much. I'm going to sign off now. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Hi, everyone. Bye.